Hi guys, today I would like to talk about successful writing, writing to get good grades. I would like to give you some simple tips on what to write, and how to format your text so that your teacher will like it and give good grades for it. We're going to take the example of writing a summary, but what I'm going to say is going to be true for most texts. So don't just see this as applying to summaries. And we're going to look at a summary of a scene from the film Wonder, which you don't need to know. You don't have to know the film. You don't have to have seen the scene. If you want to watch it on YouTube, that's fine. Go ahead, but you don't need to do this to understand what I'm going to say to you. In order to save time, I've already written out a summary here for us, and I would like to go through it with you. Now, the first thing, hopefully, that strikes you is that this is not a very readable and nicely structured text. It's a big chunk of text that you don't know what the parts of the texts are, and the font, the printing is so small that you find it hard to read. So what I would like you to do is first of all change the font. So you mark the text, you go up here, and you change the font from 11, which is what Word suggests to you, to 12 or even 14. And now this becomes much easier to read. Secondly, this is what we call a left aligned text, left aligned, which you can see here. And it means that you have a straight line going down here, but this kind of wobbly edge on the right hand side. And you don't want that. You don't want a left aligned text. You don't want a right aligned text like this. You don't want a center text like this. What you want is what we call a justified text, which is in German Blocksatz, okay? Which means you have these nice straight lines. So this is how you align the text, mark it, and hit this button. Now we have a nicely straight text, but it's still not really split up into paragraphs, into parts. So this is what we do. We have to decide where the parts of this text are. And I'm going to show you very quickly. We have an introductory sentence here, and we're going to make a paragraph, start a new paragraph here, and then we're going to go on and see that something new happens here. Don't worry about reading the texts in detail right now, but just trust me that there's something new that happens here. And you might even add another paragraph, for instance, here, so that now the text is 4 paragraphs, the first being the introductory sentence, which is always a good idea. New paragraph, and then 3 paragraphs which divide up the action, the plot that you're going to summarize into nice chunks, nice pieces, to make it much more readable. So looking at the text like this, you can see it's much easier to read. When you format the text, there are things that students sometimes do, which I want to point out. I don't know why they do them, but just avoid them. Very often, if you look at the ending of a sentence, students will write like this. They will put a little space before the period, and then put the period, and then go on writing immediately. And you do the opposite. You can see the blue line which tells you this is wrong. So do the opposite. Never have a space before the period. So delete that space. Instead, have a space after the period. I have no idea why he still marks Jack as wrong, but again, let me show you. Don't do it like this. Yeah, space before the period. No space after the period. Don't do it like that. Do the opposite. No space before the full stop and a space right after this. Same here if you look at commas. This is the right way. Next, comma, space, new word. Don't do it like this. Next, comma, no space. Yeah, wrong. Next, comma, space. Okay, so this was about formatting the text, so it looks fairly nicely, and you can already see when you use a program like Word that there are hardly any little underlinings, so there can't be a lot of mistakes in the text. How do you write the text? You always start with the introductory sentence, give it its own paragraph, as we said, and be sure to say what kind of text you have. In this case, you have a scene from a feature film, not an excerpt from a novel, not a poem, not an article from a newspaper, but this. You have a title, obviously. You have an author, or in the case of a film, you have a director. It's directed by Stephen Chbosky. In the case of a novel or a story, you would say written by. And you tell your readers when it was released. In the case of a text, it would be published in 2017, but with a film, the word to use is release. And then you finish your introductory sentence with the most important part, saying what the scene is about, the topic, the theme, not what happens in the scene, but what the deeper message or the deeper theme of this scene is. When you go on writing, here's some tips on how to get good grades and be successful. Now, first of all, you start by describing the setting. Many students, go right into the scene and say this happens and this person does that and so on. Always tell the audience, the readers, where and when the scene is set. So this scene is set in the school cafeteria, and it is set during lunch break. You tell them where and when. Always do this. Make sure you let your readers know. Then head into the text, and when you do this, let's look at the first sentence here. Don't worry about the characters. If you don't know them, they're not important. I'm just going to look at the language aspect of this thing. The first sentence, Jack is about to sit down at a table with Julian and his friends when he sees Augie sitting all alone and decides to join him. Now, I want to point out some things about this sentence. You could phrase it, you can say this much simpler, in a much simpler way. You could say something like, Jack wants to sit down at a table with Julian and his friends, but then he sees Augie, who sits alone, and goes over to his table and sits down with him. And that would be correct, but it would be quite simple English, wouldn't be very elegant English. So try to use phrases that are a little more elegant, phrases that you wouldn't have used in year 5 or 6 or 7. Okay, so for instance, a phrase like, he's about to sit, which nice English phrase which says this will happen it's going to happen in a second. He is about to do this. And very often you use this phrase when you say, but then something else happened. But then he decided differently, as in this case. So he's about to sit down when, connect these two sentences, he sees Augie sitting all alone. Use a participle phrase. This is a participle. He sees him doing this. In a similar way, you could make sentences like, I watched her eating, or we noticed them running, or something like that. Okay, use participle phrases like that, like he sees Augie sitting, to show your teacher you can do it, and he or she will appreciate it, give good grades. You could say he goes over and sits with him, but you could also use the nice word join. In English, when you have a group or a pair of people, you go over to them, you join them. And again, show your teacher you know this word. Show him or her that your vocabulary is large enough to use words like that. He starts talking, you could say that, but you could say he opens their conversation. Again, you can use a participle phrase by assuring Augie that he deliberately put some mistakes into the physics test. Use a nice word like deliberately, on purpose, not by chance. When you use it, be sure to use the adverb. How did he put the mistakes in there? Deliberately. Obviously, you should know this, but many students make mistakes here, and they will say he deliberately put some mistakes there. So your teacher will say, okay, he knows or she knows how to use adverbs, and so on. Use connectives. to do this. Make sure they create a connection between the parts of the sentences, like next, then, in contrast, as a consequence, and so on. Here you have the word he admits that he only goes to the school because it offered him a scholarship. And then the sentence goes on, which makes Audie and the audience understand that Jack's family is poor. Then Augie lets on that he doesn't like eating in front of others. So both boys sit there and both of them admit something rather shameful or embarrassing. Jack admits that he only goes to this school and so on and so on. And then Augie lets on, because you don't want to use admit again, because you want to show your teacher, Mrs. Teacher, Mr. Teacher, sir, ma'am, my vocabulary is large enough to employ another word, to use another word, not just admit, but in this case, to let on, to avoid repetition, to use a new phrase for the same thing. Okay? He doesn't like eating. That's a gerund. It's a verb that ends in ing, but we had participle constructions up here, and in this case, it's a gerund. Yeah. Sorry, got mixed up here. He doesn't like eating. That's the one I was looking for. The gerund. Never mind the difference if you're not sure about it right now, but be sure to use these constructions to make your teacher realize that you can use these elegant ways of speaking English. Okay, now I hope I've helped you just a little bit on your way to writing successfully, getting good grades for your writing, by pointing out how you structure the text, how you format it, how you use justified format, how you use space. Oh, I didn't point out that if you want to have the space between paragraphs, make sure you go here and you set this to something more than 0. Usually 6 is something that Word suggests, so you have this space. If you don't do this, let me just show you this, then there's a paragraph here, but it's not very clear. And to make this more clear, you can do this and add this, change this to 3 or 6 or 4, whatever you like. As I said, 6 is what Word suggests, and then the paragraph becomes more clear because there's a little space here. So formatting the text, using nice English, putting in the stuff that you need to put in, like telling the reader about the setting, telling the reader about the theme of the scene, and so on. All these are things which will which will help you improve your grades. And remember that 60% of your grade is language. 60% is how you write what you want to say. So make sure you put these things into your text that I just mentioned. I'm not going to point out again. And I hope this has been helpful. As always, let me know if you have questions or suggestions about this. And good luck with using this and with getting better grades for your writing.